Star Wars is a phenomenon in itself. Lucas capitalized on the monolithic monomyth and created one of the first universal cinema masterpieces, alongside technical geniuses and promising talent. The stars aligned in the right mix of acting, filming, scripting, and editing collided to create an unforgettable experience. It defined the generations after it, and literally changed all of cinema forever. Even subtle elements like the placement of the credits inspired everyone to conform to Star Wars' style. It's a masterpiece through and through. It's no wonder I grew up with the expectation that no greater set of films existed, that the universe was infallible, that Star Wars was the greatest series ever. It was a foolish adolescent belief. The pleasant and accessible storytelling of science and fantasy fiction, portrayed excellently on screen, was alluring. It is a delectable hook. It'd be easy to chalk up my waning and waxing love of Star Wars to a growing cynicism with age. But it's better to argue my taste has simply evolved over time. All work is inherently argumentative, and my perspective on Lucas's interpretation left me wanting. I find a lot lacking in transcendent storytelling that practices binary morality. I was the type to play lawful paladin, but as my experiences grew, so too did an inability to relate to that archetype. I could simply no longer believe in binary metrics, especially in terms of morality, and the cartoonist depiction by Star Wars was unsettling at times. At its core, the original trilogy parades Vader as the exception, and therefore the core interest. Redemption is powerful because it is difficult, but due to its possibility, further questions must be posed. Lucas's philosophy surrounding the absolute good and evil in the world, once proposed as dependent on one's selfish nature, is kinda gross. I find the dynamics of temptation, redemption, and the struggle of moral identity fascinating. Star Wars has always been its best when the lines were blurred. The reinforcement by the prequels to establish a clear code, and whether intentionally or ineptly display the Jedi Order breaking its own rules, is crucial to the essence of the experience. When the reality of doctrines settle where binary moral systems lay, is when the plot thickens most. When the Jedi are a corruptible, stagnant cyst on a republic that permits tremendous suffering against the violent usurpers promoting change, claiming anything defeats what has always been, is captivating. There's still clear pro and antagonist, even sides, but there's a bit of nuance present when the lines blur. Arguably one of the older and most beloved tropes of Star Wars is the practice and use of sympathetic villains. Yes, they're genuinely evil, arguably irredeemable, and definitely not worth rooting for, at least at times, but they retain enough humanity, charm, and relatable trauma to incite love in an audience. On the surface, I no longer love the hero who lifts a blade of light aloft, or the plain narrative behind the conflict, but the intricacies are why I have not let go of this old love. There is no better example of an intricate Star Wars than in the expanded universe, and more specifically, in the Old Republic. The Old Republic is countless years prior to the movie's setting, instead operating during and after the events of the Mandalorian Wars. It's an ancient time period when the Mandalorians were an empire, not just a people or a planet. It was a time before the rule of two, before a weakened Jedi Order, and most importantly, before many teachings on both sides were lost. It's arguable to say that the average Jedi and Sith were weaker than the ones we know, but the lost practices, technologies, and artifacts made up the difference. The Old Republic was everything I wanted Star Wars to be. It was dark, gritty, full of powers and technology lost to time. KOTOR was a full-scale war between light and dark, too grand to hide the suffering on both sides. It was both the most fiction and fantasy of the science because it went wild with the suffering and power scaling. It was where the writers went to critique modern Star Wars, and through fiction, argue what it was. It was the darker, more serious time period that was able to freely be more Star Wars than Star Wars ever was. It was more of an idea than a vision. It was a collective dream they shared. For me, it was everything cool about Star Wars. There was more of a human element to the sides. Exceptions were given to permit love between Jedi. There were a few interesting Sith. Darth Malgus, for example, was against the systemic racism in the Sith Empire. These are topics brought up in the movies but never challenged or explored properly. The Old Republic was so detached from the core of the series that it felt like there was room to explore. And that's only in the self-titled MMO that was predated by two older other titles, Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic and its sequel, KOTOR 2, Sith Lords. KOTOR was the root of this series seed. The Old Republic suggested that maybe we were greater than alignments and cosmic conflicts, and KOTOR is the start of that argument. Knights of the Old Republic, affectionately called KOTOR, is not the deepest work in Star Wars. It's a typical hero's journey, but with a twist and lots of charm, excellent dialogue. I'm going to lean on the box art and the back cover because it does some justice, leading with, "Choose your path. It is 4,000 years before the Galactic Empire, and hundreds of Jedi Knights have fallen in battle against the ruthless Sith. You are the last hope of the Jedi Order. Can you master the awesome power of the Force on your quest to save the Republic? Or will you fall to the lure of the dark side?" And then it goes on to illuminate the breadth of Force powers, lightsaber customization, plenty of sightseeing, famous and new planets, featuring diverse creatures, your own ship to explore in, and a traditional cast with some extra flavor, an example being a homicidal assassin droid obsessed with murder.
Definition. Love is making a shot to the knees of a target 120 kilometers away using an Aerotech sniper rifle with a tri-light scope.
It sells the role-playing experience well, giving the player everything and more for their own personal Star Wars story. Way back in 2003, when Star Wars hype was still fresh with the new movies coming out, the year after Attack of the Clones and 2 years before Revenge of the Sith, KOTOR was all the rave. It was a great time to be a fan, and an even better time to sell the chance to be in a Star Wars story from the comfort of your couch. It was genius, and would eventually change not just Star Wars, but also gaming entirely. It was the first entry of what would be BioWare's third-person RPG format, adapting lessons from Baldur's Gate and Neverwinter Nights, and transforming it into a still very tabletop experience, but in a more personalized and accessible format, with its binary alignment systems, perspective, companions, choices, influences, and multiple endings. KOTOR is captivating on multiple levels. Historically, it greatly impacted two massive cultures, gamers and the Star Wars fanboys. KOTOR is so many things. It's the perfect subject for the BioWare formula. It's an evolution of Star Wars and what it could be. It's how my brother and I bonded for years. It was one of my first great gaming loves. I think a lot of people stopped with Pokemon, Spyro, and the like. But KOTOR kept me involved and drove my passion for games until others could continue carrying the torch. We outgrow a lot of media, and it's easy to leave whole mediums behind, and KOTOR held the torch in possibly the darkest hour, when games could have easily have been only for children. KOTOR explored topics like morality, like a bludgeon, but was overall interesting. Characters like Joe Lee, who are good aligned characters, but display as neutral, are fantastic questions. There's an engagement in the idea that you walk your own path and not fall. Not to mention the twist in question. If you know, you know. And if you don't, it's been 20 plus years and it's unplayable nowadays, so the discovery that the player is the big bad's old master presents so many opportunities for variables. My first playthrough, I did a complete 180. I went from full light to full dark and conformed to my previous identity, and it was an awesome subversion of expectations, guided by the surprise and my choices. I went from being myself to conforming to a character willingly, and it was phenomenal. There's so much room for variation that discussion follows no matter what. It's long forgotten now, but there was a time when I questioned the morality of KOTOR's choices. It's almost always cut and dry, good or bad. But as a kid, I wondered if the long-term consequences would be the opposite of the points I just accrued. In short, I disagreed with the short-sighted, absolute, and binary BioWare metric of morality. It was one of the first instances where I realized morality could be subjective. It's no joke that I used to regularly play KOTOR several times a year, and later once a year for either 1 or 2, and used it to gauge change. Over time, my philosophies evolved, and I ran out of interest in the first, instead choosing to challenge my perspectives in the second game, which is honestly better written. It was a fun game I played within a game at a very different stage in my life, but it shows depth, character, and emphasizes the pure quality of KOTOR. There's an art form to the interactivity, the variability, the level of choice and customization present in this RPG. So many different ways to interact and experience the same work, not just multiple ways between players, but for every player. I distinctly remember when I recommended KOTOR to an old friend of mine, and they couldn't believe it was from 2003. It may be hard to believe, but this game looks phenomenal for this time. This console boasted Halo, Fable, and Elder Scrolls 3 and 4, and managed to be more cinematic, look cleaner, and took a stylistic approach to realism using the tech they had and created something that aged well and looked great on release. Now it's especially rough around the edges, but I still find the overall look charming. I miss the days when this was breathtaking, astonishing for the time. It predates the 7th generation, but I can clearly see the roots of 7 and 6. Sponsored by one of the greatest and most consistent developers of those 2 eras, KOTOR looks great. It's smooth, or was, and was perfectly personable and cinematic, without ever taking a break to pause. Any interested party will enjoy and take in the dialogue, the stroll through the universe, and the expressive, subtle turn-based combat. And it's all coupled with perfect accessibility. There's variety in the play, multiple solutions to every puzzle, build specific solutions, and always a solution that requires on no build, and it's always arguably the harder option, depending on the player's wit instead. Not to mention literal difficulty options, and overall being not a difficult game. There's even automatic leveling for the indecisive player. Everything present has this wonderful fluid flow. It feels like an evolution of the RPG, before Final Fantasy even thought up of the idea. In a lot of ways, it plays itself, it's autonomous. There's opportunity to cue actions, pause, but ultimately your party does what they think is best, with pretty okay AI. And the player can be reactive, or proactive, or AFK and watch the magic. It's the perfect blend of a real-time RPG, without ever crossing the line into an action RPG. It's a unique space to exist in, and holds a charm that BioWare clung to later in the famous Dragon Age. I understand today it's dated, old, retro even, but there was a time when it appeared competent, exciting, revolutionary in some eyes, and as a child it was magical. In some ways it still is. KOTOR, however, was never about graphics or gameplay. They were icing atop the essence of Star Wars. It's an expansion, filling in the questions and holes of everything before and after it, outlining what future Star Wars would be, at least until Disney. Despite the overwhelming optimism and wanderlust of KOTOR, it suggests a darker secret of decadence and decay over centuries, possibly millennia. All of this knowledge, and none of it was preserved. All this time, and there's been almost no evolution. This theme of stagnation is concurrent with Star Wars. In many ways, this theme is Star Wars Legends. In the original movies, alongside transcendence and the spiritual conflict, was the brooding background noise of a galaxy broken. The suffering on Tatooine before and after the trilogy shows as much. There's this great irony in the prequels that the Jedi are ignorant and apathetic. They are poser guardians, hesitant to jump to war. They pose diplomacy despite being powerful warriors. They pick what battles are worth fighting. Annie's mother being a slave was a battle not worth fighting. In the grand scheme of things, that choice did bring balance. But what is balance worth against one human life. Despite the affluent vibrance and beauty of KOTOR, there were plenty of moments that highlighted the cynicism beneath the blinding conflict between light and dark. Beneath the war was the average man, woman, and child, alien even, all struggling with very real, dark, and human struggles. Racism, classism, and tyranny are the first concepts introduced to the player on Terrace, the starting planet of KOTOR. It does well to establish a tone for the Old Republic. It's better explored in the sequel, but it sets the precedent that Star Wars isn't black and white. It's not as obviously religious as Lucas intended. It doesn't reflect the monomyth nearly as much as it reflects humanity. If the monomyth is stories, then stories are human. Star Wars isn't about the same story told throughout time with fresh paint. It's about humanity, in a grander way than anyone could have anticipated. Its growth and allure contributed to this fact as its audience became creators, expanders of humanity. And KOTOR's important, because it was the start of the Old Republic and Star Wars Legends. We've come full circle. Despite being a phenomenal game, grander than that, it's the start of a second or sub-universe within Star Wars, permitted to get nitty and gritty about the philosophies proposed by Lucas's cult of thought. But beyond that, it's also the glue that formed my brother and I's tight friendship. We obsessed over the Old Republic, jumping from KOTOR to KOTOR 2 and eventually the grander, expanded universe hidden on paper, or ebook in our case. It was a topic of discussion that kept us talking, even into adulthood. It's probably why we can still be so far apart and find excuses to talk games and fiction with each other at random, at whim. And that's cherishable. It's something I share with every fan in part, a sense of community, because we all love the same pocket of something larger. More than Star Wars, we love KOTOR, and that means something, at least to us. The easiest way to spot it is to open Tor, the Old Republic, and discuss the world and worlds in general chat, and find that same obsessive energy out there. Knights of the Old Republic is too much. It's how I bonded with plenty of folks, the start of friendships, the entry point to philosophy through its sequel, the gateway drug to games as art, and so much more. There's no real way to define my experience. I love the game, its systems, mechanics, how it forever hooked me on choice-driven RPGs. I love what it did for the universe, how so much rebounded off of it to tell equally wonderful stories. I love the relationship I share with so many others who are blessed to share the experiences and conversations we'll forever have with each other and the Old Republic. I think I just love KOTOR, all in all. The greatest irony a remake can achieve is when it's why something is inaccessible. It's the greatest corporate excuse to cease and desist restoration projects and gatekeep art, all while mismanaging the project until it's forever left in the oblivion of game dev hell. Among awful ports, aging platforms, and plain old malpractice out of greed, there's nothing more aggravating than seeing an old favorite and treasured formative journey become impossible to recommend and nearly impossible to see again. Amid all the modern woes and worries of 2023, with the several looming wars and the fact I'm still within my military's reach, I instead choose to stress over a video game. There's no way to sugarcoat it. Despite everything else that could and really is bothering me, I'm most currently frustrated by KOTOR and its remake, and the recent drama surrounding its trailer. To summarize, PlayStation took the thing down, claiming they don't like to publish anything with licensed music, aka the Star Wars theme was no longer tolerable on their channel after 2 years of being tolerable. After 2 years, they're only now worried about Disney or LucasArts copyright, striking a game in development. Honestly, it could mean nothing, but right now it's the biggest red flag that the KOTOR remake is in development hell, and I wonder if we'll be lucky enough to ever see a release, good or bad. Editor's note: more news came out, it definitely probably means something's wrong. It's aggravating because the remake would have opened the legend to new eyes and ears. It'd finally be accessible to a modern audience. I'm not being dramatic when I say it's nearly impossible to play nowadays. KOTOR 2 has the restoration mod, and it's a bit more modern, and the PC port still works fine on newer computers. KOTOR 1 had all restoration projects, fan-made, remakes, everything unofficial, threatened with cease and desist. The only excuse backing it all was that the 20-year-old game was finally about to be remastered. The issue is now there's only one place to rest our hopes, and it was delisted by a major industry partner. I have an easy 1,000 hours between, or possibly with each title, 1 and 2. I've read too many books and spent a childhood fantasizing a potential KOTOR 3. I have half 1,000 hours in the MMO. It's bewildering to think that the Old Republic means more to me than Star Wars now. To see the founder of the Old Republic become less and less playable, less accessible, and not even able to play KOTOR 1 anymore is heartbreaking. Originally, KOTOR was going to be a more bland video. I wanted to dive into the details of its systems and mechanics and explore the customization and variety of options, the design behind enforcing player autonomy. It was going to be more technical, brush over the details, it would set the stage for the Sith Lords. But that's not the story I get to share. I'd love to instead talk about the little details effluent everywhere, like the description of every item adding desired depth to the universe, or the fantastic dialogue despite a rather plain plot. But instead we're looking at an apocalyptic scenario for the game, not hypothetical, but literal. The reality that KOTOR is on its way to being forgotten is approaching fast. Due to dated and aging hardware, shitty ports, and corporate bullshit, it's getting ever more difficult to play KOTOR. Today, it's buggy, prone to crashes, barely works on OG hardware, doesn't really work on modern PCs, emulation seems stagnant, and the corporate companies behind it, aka Disney, are willing to stomp out any restoration effort. We live in a world where charity and preservation for art and its audience is second to greed. It doesn't make sense to me why this is permitted. I'm curious why digital media has such a long lifetime in corporate hands, considering how quickly it can be forgotten and inaccessible to everyone, even its developer. I can see the incentive, all profit, no care. How the nostalgia withdrawals will blur the edges and make any product desirable, if only to experience one's childhood or happiness once more. Remakes are all the rage, you know. And if we can stomp out supply and forget the details, who cares how poor the product is on release? After all, it's been 20, 30 years, you'll take anything you can get. It sounds comedically villainous, but then again, it's fucking Disney. I get wanting to hold on to your IP in case it eventually can turn a profit. I get being against some piracy, but I don't get suppression of fixing old products for free, or the prevention and outright negligence of preservation. It's malicious, like very clearly it's selfish, and the definition of Lucas's evil. It screams Apple in the way you can't even share your own fix or solutions without threats and consequences. If I can't make money off it, why allow it? It's plainly gross. It's ugly in contrast to written work, which expires with its author. Admittedly, games are a cooperative effort to craft. But imagine if, for example, Barnes & Noble's made the next Dracula and said that no one can reprint it after the first 10,000 copies, and the copyright doesn't expire until well after the pages go brittle and turn to dust. The only way around losing that written work would then be a reprint that may or may not have the same integrity as the first, and worse, may never happen. And excuse me, but it's fucking stupid and insane. We live in a time with a modern-day Alexandria, the internet, and in its archives, we find consistent fires, or firemongers, who wish to see the pinnacle of human innovation and accumulated knowledge burn. I'm 100% for paying artist creators what they're due, but I cannot support some back-alley investor or owner telling me I can't enjoy what I purchased because it wasn't fucking meant to last this long. It's like fining me for fixing my car instead of getting a new one. It's cruel and fucking crazy. I'm just tired of watching one of my favorite games fade from history. It's hard to recommend or share something so inaccessible, and at times, it's hard to enjoy what's becoming unplayable. We got promised a remake, the perfect excuse to cease and desist, but today, there's no remake in sight, and the fan-made restoration project is still in the dirt. I'm just tired of watching the best part of Star Wars continue to get ignored and left behind. I miss playing KOTOR. I miss sharing KOTOR. I actually booted it up again for footage. I felt myself falling for it all over again. The plot's never been anything spectacular outside the twist, but the dialogue and abundant flavor text is so above everything at the time, and arguably even today. I got my crash footage, reloaded my save, swapped between disc and digital on the Xbox, and still ran into walls. I couldn't get the damn thing to work on Windows 11, which is a shame since the PC version was the best way to play it. Like 10 years ago, I think. This kind of blatant blocking of a game I dearly love and a historical piece of gaming's history needs to stop. Restoration mods should be allowed to be created and shared to anyone with a legal copy. The ports and remakes shouldn't be excuses to crappily make cash grabs and justify canceling fan-made projects with more effort and care than anything they could provide. I love KOTOR, and one day I hope to give it a thorough, self-indulgent examination and praise it for everything it is. For now, I can only staunchly criticize the powers that be for the scenario, and support any and all archivist movements to preserve what they so callously allowed to be lost. If you love any digital media, say it. Stand for it, preserve and support preservation, and speak out against unfair digital copyright law, because otherwise, the world will keep burning Alexandria down, time after time.